I was never the first choice. Not in dramatic ways. No one ever said it out loud. There were no cruel rejections, no sharp words meant to put me in my place. It was quieter than that. Politer. Almost invisible. I was the backup plan. The one people turned to when something else didn't work out. When they needed stability. When excitement failed. When chaos became too loud and they wanted something safe. For a long time, I told myself that meant I was dependable. Mature. Strong. I told myself it was a compliment that being chosen eventually was still being chosen. What I didn't realize was how deeply that role shaped me. I learned early how to wait. I learned how to stay available without being demanding. How to be present without being central. How to offer support without expecting priority. I became very good at standing slightly to the side, ready to step in when needed and ready to step back just as quickly. It felt reasonable. I didn't want to pressure anyone. I didn't want to compete. I didn't want to be a burden. I told myself that if I stayed calm, patient, and understanding, things would naturally work out. They rarely did. I watched people choose other paths first. Other relationships. Other dreams. Other lives. And when those choices collapsed, when disappointment arrived, when certainty failed, that's when I was invited in. I told myself it was timing. I told myself that being second didn't mean being less. But over time, something inside me adapted to that position. I stopped expecting to be chosen immediately. I stopped imagining myself as someone's priority. I prepared myself for the role of later, maybe, if nothing else works. I became cautious with my hopes. That caution felt like intelligence. I structured my life so that rejection wouldn't hurt too much. I kept emotional distance, even when I cared deeply. I learned how to give without fully committing, because fully committing as a backup plan is dangerous. It leaves you exposed when the original option returns. So I stayed flexible. Always ready. Never anchored. People appreciated that about me. They said I was easy to talk to. Safe. Reliable. Someone who didn't complicate things. Someone who understood. And I did understand. I understood how to minimize myself. Relationships followed the same pattern. Friendships, romantic connections, even work dynamics. I was often valued just not first. Not urgently. Not decisively. I told myself that urgency was overrated. That slow bonds were deeper. That my role required patience, not pride. Years passed like that. I built a life that could be paused at any moment. A life that didn't demand too much attention. A life that could be stepped away from if something better came along for them, not for me. I didn't see how much that flexibility cost me. I was always half prepared for loss. Half detached. Half invested. I never fully relaxed into my own life because I had trained myself to be replaceable. The realization didn't come suddenly. It came one quiet evening, alone, when I noticed something unsettling. I was imagining my future, not dreaming, not hoping, just projecting forward. And in every version of that future, I was still waiting. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting to be prioritized. Waiting for someone else's decision to define my place. That image frightened me. Not because it was dramatic but because it was familiar. I realized then that I had built my identity around being an option, not a choice. I had learned how to survive without claiming space. How to matter without insisting on it. I had mistaken adaptability for strength. But adaptability, when it's rooted in fear, slowly erases you. I began to wonder something I had never asked before: what would my life look like if I stopped living as a backup plan even to myself? That question stayed with me, heavy and unresolved. Because the truth was painful and simple, I had never chosen myself first. and I had no idea what would happen if I did. Once that question took hold, it refused to stay theoretical. What would my life look like if I stopped living as a backup plan? At first, I tried to answer it safely. I imagined small adjustments, slight confidence, clearer boundaries that wouldn't scare anyone away. I told myself I could remain essentially the same person, just with better self-respect. That was another compromise. Because the more I paid attention, the clearer it became that being a backup wasn't just something others did to me. It was something I had rehearsed for years. I entered situations already prepared to lose. I offered myself with an exit strategy. I loved with one foot always angled toward the door. I didn't risk being first because first can be replaced. Second already expects it. That realization was humiliating. I began to see how often I anticipated rejection before it existed. How quickly I softened my presence when I sensed competition. How instinctively I reassured others that I didn't need much, didn't want much, wouldn't be disappointed. I had been managing expectations so well that I had erased my own. Loneliness arrived then, not the sudden, dramatic kind, but a deep, echoing one. Because once you see the pattern, you can't pretend connection is just unlucky timing anymore. You have to face the role you've been playing. I withdrew. Not to punish anyone. Not to make a point. I withdrew because I needed to hear myself without the constant static of anticipation. Without the reflex to accommodate. Without the quiet fear of being replaced. Being alone felt unnatural at first. I wasn't used to choosing how to spend my time without imagining how it would affect someone else. I would start something and immediately think, is this worth it? Not in terms of my own fulfillment, but in terms of whether it would still matter if someone better came along. That thought startled me every time. It revealed how deeply conditional my sense of worth had become. I realized that I had never fully committed to my own life. I kept it provisional, just like my place in other people's. I avoided making choices that would anchor me too strongly because anchors can be abandoned. So I floated. Floating looks peaceful from a distance. From the inside, it's exhausting. I started to feel anger surface, not explosive, but sharp and focused. Anger at myself for never demanding more. Anger for mistaking politeness for humility. Anger for confusing patience with self-respect. That anger scared me. I had built my identity on being easy to be around. Anger felt like a threat to that. If I let it speak, I worried it would make me selfish, bitter, unrecognizable. But suppressing it had already cost me years. So I listened. The anger wasn't asking me to blame anyone. It wasn't asking me to become harsh or demanding. It was asking me to stop shrinking. It asked me why I always assumed I was optional. Why I treated interest as temporary. Why I prepared myself for loss before connection had even begun. The answers weren't flattering. I was afraid that if I insisted on being first, I would be left with nothing. Afraid that my value depended on being agreeable, adaptable, easy to replace. I had learned to survive by being second. But survival isn't the same as living. The real crisis came when I imagined the future again, this time without softening it. I saw myself years from now, still available, still patient, still understanding. Still waiting for someone else to decide whether I mattered enough to stay. The image made my chest tighten. I understood then that if I didn't change this pattern, it would outlive every relationship I entered. New faces. Same role. Different names. Same position, always close, never central. That was when the fear shifted. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of continuing to exist only as an option. And for the first time, the idea of choosing myself fully, unapologetically felt less terrifying than the thought of staying replaceable. But choosing myself would cost me something. It would cost me familiarity. It would cost me approval. It would cost me the comfort of being wanted eventually. I stood at that edge, knowing there was no way to step forward without losing the safety of being a backup plan. And the question that remained was simple, brutal, and unavoidable: was I willing to risk being alone in order to stop being second? Choosing myself didn't feel empowering. It felt like stepping into cold air after living indoors for too long, shocking, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. I didn't suddenly become confident or decisive. I didn't walk away from people with dramatic speeches or demand to be prioritized. I simply stopped offering myself as an option that could be postponed. That change was quieter than I expected. And far more disruptive. I stopped waiting for invitations that came with conditions. I stopped staying available just in case. I stopped softening my presence to make room for someone else's uncertainty. The first thing I lost was familiarity. Conversations felt different when I didn't automatically agree. Dynamics shifted when I didn't rush to reassure. Some people hesitated around me now, as if unsure where they stood. Others drifted away without explanation. That hurt more than rejection ever had. Because it confirmed something I had always suspected: part of my value to them had been my willingness to be second. When that disappeared, so did the connection. For a while, I questioned myself relentlessly. Was I being unreasonable, too rigid, too proud? Had I misunderstood self-respect and turned it into isolation? But every time I considered going back, offering myself halfway again, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. The sensation of shrinking. Of rehearsing disappointment before it arrived. I couldn't return to that. Being alone felt different now. Heavier, but cleaner. There was no one to lean into for validation, but there was also no one eclipsing my presence. I was forced to face my own life directly, without the buffer of being almost chosen. At first, I didn't know what to do with that space. I had built my identity around availability, not direction. Around responsiveness, not desire. Without someone else's priorities shaping my days, I felt unanchored. But slowly, something unexpected happened. I began to notice myself. My opinions felt firmer. My preferences clearer. I started making decisions without imagining how replaceable I might be afterward. I allowed myself to invest fully in work, in interests, in moments without preparing an exit. That felt radical. I also began to understand something I had never allowed before: being chosen by someone else will never replace choosing yourself. I had waited my whole life to be someone's first priority, believing that moment would finally make me whole. But wholeness doesn't arrive from the outside. It forms when you stop treating your own life as provisional. I don't pretend this path is easier. There are nights when loneliness is sharp and unfiltered. When I miss the comfort of being needed, even if it came with erasure. When being second feels safer than being alone. But I remind myself of the cost. I remember how small my life felt when I was always waiting. How conditional my joy was. How carefully I avoided hope so disappointment wouldn't hurt. That wasn't safety. That was slow disappearance. Now, when I enter someone's life, I do it differently. I don't arrive prepared to lose. I don't stay silent to remain acceptable. I don't negotiate my worth through patience. And if I'm not chosen, truly chosen, I leave. Not angrily. Not dramatically. But intact. Because I finally understand this: being a backup plan keeps you close to life, but never inside it. Being second may feel safer, but it teaches you to accept less than you deserve. I spent years waiting to be someone's priority. What changed my life wasn't finally being chosen. It was realizing that I could stop offering myself as an option. And for the first time, I chose myself first. Even when it meant standing alone. Especially then.